Okay, it's my first time making one of these, so excuse me if it's a bit clunky. But what I've got here is a screencast which perhaps will help you talk you through the assignment a little bit. To be honest, it's not very different to the stuff that we've gone through in the lecture for those of you there, but it means you've got something, I suppose, that you can keep referring back to. So this is the thing we're asking you to do in your assignment. So you've got to submit an essay that uses sociological theories engaged with through the module to critique an educational experience of exclusion from two or more perspectives. And from conversations I've been having, plus the questions that you've been submitting via the Padlet, the thing that seems to be confusing people more than anything is this two or more perspectives. So basically there's kind of several ways that you can think about this, and I'm going to go through some of the ways that you can think about this now. So to give one example, if you were to look at disabled teachers, okay, so that's the group that you're focusing on, the social group, the categorization, I suppose. One of the ways that you'll think about that is through experience, or could be that you think about that is through experience of disableism, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on Monday, so don't worry that you don't know some of these terms yet. So you might think about the experience of how disability mediates their experience as disabled teachers. That's the experience. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. And then to theorise that, you might use the social model of disability. Okay, so you've got one perspective there. You also might think, well, actually, disabled teachers have lots of different social positioning, so they're also classed, gendered, race, they have a sexuality, etc. And those different social positionings, along with their experience of disability, will also mediate those experiences. And the theory that you can help you with that is intersectionality. Now, obviously, you can apply that kind of framework to any social group. So if you want to think about the experiences of primary school students of colour, you might think about how their experiences are mediated through race, through experience of racism, and you might use critical race theory. But you also might think, well, actually, they're all also classed. Some of them might be disabled. They've got genders. They've got sexualities. So intersectionality could help you there again. So that's one way of doing it. You might want to be more specific when you focus in. So you might think, actually, I want to think about the experiences of black boys in education. And then you've perhaps got something very obvious in terms of those two perspectives, because you've got gender and you've got race. So you might use gender theory alongside critical race theory. You might want to think about disabled women teachers, and then again you've got gender and disability to think about, or disabled teachers of colour. So you can be more specific, or you can use intersectionality as that second perspective, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. The other way to think about it is you could think of those different perspectives as just different theories or models. So you might still choose disabled teachers, but just want to focus on the barriers that disabled teachers face in relation to disability. And that's all right. Because what you can use are two different theories as your two different perspectives. So you might use the medical model of disability as one theory to theorise those experiences, and the social model of disability as another theory. So it could be two different theories where those perspectives come from, rather than two different forms of categorisation, I suppose. Another example, teenage parents. So if you're thinking about teenage parents, you might think about their experiences and how they're mediated around class. You might use Bourdieu as a theorist to talk about that. And you might also think that their experiences are mediated around gender and use gender theory to discuss that. You could, I think I've talked to some of you about this example before, use Roma gypsy travellers. And you might want to think about their experiences in relation to class and in relation to race and racism. So some groups, I suppose, you can have one particular group and their experience are quite obviously mediated through two or more different perspectives, or two or more different perspectives are often talked about in the literature. So if you look at the literature around Roma gypsy traveller families, you'll see class and race are talked about quite a lot. Okay. But the main thing you've got to do, so the way you can interpret those perspectives is quite free, I suppose. It's up to you to kind of justify how you're using two or more perspectives in your essay. The main thing that you need to concentrate on is that you're meeting these assignment criteria. So assignment criteria 1, to provide an account of the experiences and processes of educational exclusion of a chosen social group or groups. Think about what the experience are of that particular group, and also think about the processes. And by processes, we mean things like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, disableism. That's what we mean by that term, processes. So how educational institutions, I suppose, are set up for a certain type of person, and that person is often white, male, middle class, and so on. So what are those processes of marginalisation, and how do they mediate the experiences? The second thing we're asking you to do in your second criteria is to compare those experiences with dominant educational discourses of inclusion, of achievement, of potential, of fairness, aspiration, and so on. So basically what we're getting you to do is say, look, this is what educational policy and practice says it's doing. You won't find an educational institution that doesn't have a equality and diversity policy, for example, saying that we really value diversity, we're really equal, really fair. You're taking those policies, the way those things are talked about, the way education's talked about, and you're comparing that to these experiences of marginalisation. Okay, so although that perhaps seems the most complicated criteria, actually it's almost looking for a kind of policy practice gap in a way. Here's what the policy says it's doing. Well, how come these people are still having these experiences of marginalisation? You've spent quite a lot of time in your seminars discussing how different experiences relate to dominant discourses, so I suggest going back through that material. And then finally, applying appropriate sociological theories to explain the experiences. So that's your stuff like critical race theory, like the social model of disability, like ableism, like Bourdieu, like the gender theory that Moona's going to be introducing you to in a few weeks. The other thing that there is on Blackboard at the minute is an assignment guidance, and I'm not sure how many of you found that, but that almost kind of outlines these criteria in a little bit more detail and almost gives you a little bit of an essay plan if you read it quite carefully. Alright, that's the end of my slides. So I'll move over to the... I'll just show you this. So when you're looking at that first assignment criteria, I just want to point you that when you're looking for experiences, there's actually... I'm posting lots of these on the Twitter. So if you use Twitter, you can use the hashtag #ShoeInclusion, but if you don't, if you click here, Twitter feed, on the Shoespace site, then you'll see all the things I've been tweeting, and a lot of them are to do with people's experiences. So it's worth having a little browse through that. The reason they're repeated lots of times is just when people retweet them, but kind of work your way through them and have a look through them. So the questions, some of these questions I'll have already answered. So the ones about perspectives have been answered to an extent. Excuse me. So what's the meaning of two perspectives? Do you mean choosing two social groups? I think I've explained that. Not really. You don't need to choose two social groups. So you've used the example of teenage mothers there. You could look at that through class and through gender, and you've got your two perspectives. If you want to look at trans children's or teachers' experiences, you could look at gender theory and you could look at intersectionality. Or you could decide you want to look at the experience of trans women of colour and use critical race theory and gender theory. You've put gender and social class. You could look at gender and social class in relation to trans experiences. And you could also think about how actually a lot of these things compound one another. So if you're trans, you're more likely to live in poverty, for example, because you're more likely to be discriminated in the workplace. So there's a rationale for thinking about social class in relation to that. And the same goes for disability and probably other things as well. Could I choose one perspective to focus on throughout the essay and acknowledge intersectionality? Yeah, okay, that's one of the things I was talking about. I think it'd be a little bit more than just an acknowledgement of intersectionality, but you can certainly use intersectionality as one of those theories and one of those perspectives to think about. Do you have to talk about your two perspectives equally? There's no... we're not going to be measuring in a way, but you want to make sure, I guess the thing to think about is, have you discussed all the assignment criteria equally? The assignment criteria that students usually do least well on is the second one about discourse, so make sure you're paying equal attention to all the assignment criteria. It doesn't matter so much about paying equal attention to the two perspectives. Could I choose to focus on learning disabilities and SEN schools? Yeah, you can do. Yeah, there's no reason that you can't use that as a particular focus. I was thinking about looking at mental health problems. Now, mental health isn't something we've looked at particularly through the module. So if you're to do that, I guess what I'd say is make sure you're confident in searching for your own material and things like that. Offhand, I don't have any suggestions for reading, but what I would suggest is going to speak to a librarian if you're struggling to find literature, and seeing what's out there. Can I be used throughout the essay? Yes, you're completely fine to write in first person. If I was to choose gender, could I talk about transgender and then women as my two perspectives? Now, gender isn't a social group, and this is one of the things to make sure you've got in your head. Disability isn't a social group, but disabled people are a social group. Gender isn't a social group, but women are, or trans women are, or I suppose trans people are, or men are, or cis men are, or cis women are. So gender wouldn't be the social group, but you could use gender as the focus of your essay and use your two perspectives as trans people's experiences, and then, I mean, some trans people are also women, is important to remember, so you might be looking at cis women's experiences and trans women's experiences, I guess, as two perspectives, which could be an interesting way to think about it. How does the essay have to be set out? There's no real answer to that, I'm afraid, but what I would say is the assignment guidance under the assignment tab on Blackboard kind of talks you through one way you could set it out, but people, because of the nature of these essays being so different, there's no particular framework for you to set the essay out in. Although you can always use the assignment criteria as a bit of a framework if that helps you. Do you have to focus on a particular section of education? No, you don't have to, but sometimes it can help to have focus. So one of the things that I'm always saying to people is make sure you're not sacrificing depth of argument in favour of breadth of argument. And what I mean by that is often the comments I end up writing are things like, oh, I wanted a bit more here, say a bit more about this, so what? Okay, so make sure you've got that depth of argument and you're not trying to spread yourself too thinly. So sometimes focus on a particular section of education can help you not spread yourself too thinly. Can you use studies from different countries? There's no reason that you can't use studies from different countries, but you need to acknowledge the different contexts that you're using. So you need to, and this is all part of reviewing literature and thinking critically about the literature you're using. If you're using literature from the States, but you're focused on the UK, that doesn't mean that literature's not useful, but you'll need to tell us why it's useful and what the differences might be between those two different contexts. If you want to focus particularly on education in a different country, again, there's nothing to stop you doing that, but I suppose I'd just say don't make it too hard for yourself. So it may be that some of you know the education system in another country very well, and that's fine. But if you're, say, looking at a country that you don't really know very much about, that might make it more difficult for you. And I think the same goes for that next question, can I write about poverty in other countries? Again, make sure you're contextualising everything that you're doing and saying. Can I write about different kinds of disability, such as physical and mental illnesses, or would it be best to specify in one? What I'm going to say to that question is hold that thought, and on Monday I'm doing a session with you around disability, which perhaps might help you to consider that and think about that a little bit more. Okay, that's all the questions, and I've gone through the assignment criteria, so I'm going to stop there. The last thing I'll say, though, is if you've still got questions, then use your seminar time to speak to your seminar tutor, because your seminar tutor is most likely to be the one that's going to mark your work unless there's illness or something like that. So speak to them and talk through your ideas and your thoughts with them.